Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Reconnection Podcast. I'm Dr. Lynn. We are here with Dr. Jordan as well. And today's episode is going to be about the Akashic Records. And we're going to explore what the Akashic Records are. At the very end, I'm going to dive into and open the Akashic Records for the collective. And Jordan's going to ask me a few questions of going into the records and some messages that want to come through. So let's talk about the records. Jordan, what has been your experience with Akashic Records and how do you understand the records?
Yeah, it's funny because I was on a walk this morning. I feel like that's how most of my stories start out, but I was on a walk this morning trying to really dive into the topic and comprehend how I understand it. And I think the internet and the advent of our connectedness to social media and all these avenues the internet has created has been a really great reflection as a comprehension, as a metaphor of explaining what the Akashic records are. Because I think prior to the advent of the internet, this concept would have felt a little more intangible, if you will. And because I see the Akashic records as almost like our iCloud as our internet source, as this expansive database, basically, almost like an AI database where all of human consciousness and experience exists. So all of our past lives, our future lives, everything we will experience exists in this database. And I think even from a quantum physics perspective, this doesn't seem as crazy because we know that time does not exist. The past, the future, the present are all existing now. So on a
Mm-hmm.
quantum level, of course, all this information is accessible through certain data points. And I think I like to
Mm-hmm.
look at the Akashic records, therefore, is just this giant internet that if you have the right server and interface, you can then therefore go into it and get whatever information you need. So I think from a personal
Mm-hmm.
perspective, it's easy to obtain information about past lives, present lives, future trajectories, things that are very personal and tangible to you. But this is an
Mm-hmm.
internet interface that contains all. So you do have access points to deeper and further knowledge, to people and beings that have lived before us, like, the Buddhas or the Christ or stuff. Their information's all there too. So you can also
Mm-hmm.
gain knowledge from people who have had more profound experiences maybe that you'd like to learn from. Is
Yeah.
that kind of your understanding, first, just for that question? Is that kind of your understanding of what the Akashic Records is, or how do you conceptualize just what it is?
Well, I love that. I love how you shared about your personal experience and your perspective on it because I also resonate with that. Like I resonate with it being this field, this interconnected web of, it's like the cloud and AI. I think that was such a great analogy for it because you can send like an in a question into AI and it'll search and scour the internet to come up with an answer, and like we can essentially do that same thing. We have that same ability to tap into that infinite potentiality of information, to ask a question, to send an inquiry in and receive in an answer, whether it's in an image or a memory or an experience or a feeling, right? Like we can ask and we can Google in the question in the Akashic Records. And so, how I understand it, I am a certified Akashic Records practitioner. I have been for like, man, it's like crazy because I thought about this recently. I was like, how long have I actually been doing the Akashic Records for? Because I kind of forgot, and I randomly got trained in it like years ago because I don't know, felt called to. And still today I use it. And when I learned Akashic Records, how I learned it was essentially it's this library of information that we have access to. It's sort of like the blueprint of the past, present, future that holds in all of this cosmic memory of all beings, all things, all animals, all plants, like everything. And there's different ways. There's also many different cultural traditions and spiritual traditions that tap into this information in many different ways. But how I do it is through a prayer process that has been taught by Linda Howe and different teachers that have been trained by her. But another way to understand, I think, the Akashic Records is I was reading this book about the Akashic Records, and it was talking about Carl Jung and how Carl
Hmm.
Jung created this term called the collective unconscious. I also believe and feel, and there's been other people that have talked about this too, that the collective unconscious is the Akashic Records. And when we start to tap into and focus on and pay attention to the collective unconscious, that's when information and potentiality can come out of that quantum place and like be manifested or materialize or, be brought up into our awareness. And so that's another way to think about it, like from that psychological perspective and lens. That is one way that our psyche, the different parts of it, are connected to the greater whole of, the collective psyche. And
Yeah.
that collective psyche holds in all the memories and information that has happened. So,
You just made me think of, and I'm gonna botch the experiment, so don't quote me directly from this, but I'm gonna give you the general information. And it was basically a human experiment that was done, I want to say like 70s, 80s, 90s, sometimes around those decades. And what they
mhm,
did was they were experimenting to see if there was kind of this collective unconscious, if there was this database that everyone's like pulling information from. And the
mhm,
reason why people are so curious is because so many times throughout history, something is invented by several people at the exact same time who have not been in
mhm,
communication with each other. So, the kind of the
mhm,
hypothesis was, if all of these people are having this like miraculous discovery at the exact same time with, these, we're talking past tense, like centuries ago when there were no communications, then there must be something that they're pulling from to gather this information from. And what the experiment did was, it took a bunch of experimentees, like 100 people, and had them solve like a puzzle. Let's just use it. And again, I might not quote you directly. And it took them, let's say, 60 seconds to solve the puzzle. And that was kind of the average from everybody. And so then that was the first part of the experiment. And then what they did was, they broadcast the answers to a puzzle on live television for 3 days and broadcast the answers, broadcast the answers, broadcast the answers. And then took another 100 people with this new puzzle now, who weren't exposed to the commercials, of course, and asked them to solve this new puzzle. And they all solved it within like 10 to 15 seconds. And so it was this idea that, they never saw or witnessed the solutions to this puzzle, but the collective had already experienced the answers because they all saw it on network television. So it was one of those things that it kind of quote unquote proved, or supported, for lack of better scientific words, supported the fact that, there is this connective web that we are pulling information from. And I think this
mhm,
has also been observed in like animal behaviors. Like one time they have taught animals in zoo captivity how to do X, Y, and Z, a habit that wasn't in the wild. And then they would go out in the wild, and the animals in the wild were doing it too. So it was like there definitely is not only this human collective consciousness, but an animal one, and just a consciousness collective in general. And I think it's something that does feel, I think for me, the hardest part I think the reason why it's so hard to conceptualize, and there might be a little bit of fear surrounding it, is I think our egos can get in the way, and it makes it feel like we don't have sovereignty, that we do not have this individuality if we are all pulling from something. But, I think how I've kind of calmed that thought and idea in my own consciousness and my own brain is, yes, although I can pull from this collective consciousness, yes, I can be influenced by it. It's still through the Jordan Maxwell lens. It's still through my view and through my eyes. And so my filter still makes it unique in my own. And that's kind of how I settle my ego. Do you ever get kind of those types of ideas where it is kind of an overwhelming feeling to know that we have that amount of connectedness?
yeah, and it makes me think about like when you Google a question, it's like you're casting this question out into this huge, large field of information that's available. And it's like you can take like whatever information you receive from that through your own filter. Like you're supposed to. That's what you're doing with
Mm,
your mind and your brain and your heart and all those things. And you're doing with whatever you want to do with that information. I think it's more of like it's a co-creating process, I think, with
mm,
the collective energy. That's how I see it, that's how I feel it. I also see how the ego can kind of come in and like kind of get in the way or be like, well, what does that mean? Like does that mean that like everyone, we're all kind of like the same and we don't have different whatever. Anyways, so I feel like when we're able to cast in that question, I also think on another level, this is just coming to me intuitively and based off of my own personal experience of going into the records for myself and others. so much of it is being processed, interpreted, and perceived by the heart. And
Mm-hmm.
another way, I actually got validated about this like recently because I learned that the heart is another gateway towards or to tap into the Akashic records, because there's so many different ways. There's so many different traditions and cultures that tap into this infinite field of consciousness and information. You can think about it in, the ancient Chinese for Chinese medicine. The earliest documentation of the medicine was people writing on oracle bones and divining in information. Like, where were they getting that information from? Where does that information, like, where's the origin of those informations, right? It's like that
Mm-hmm.
information is coming from a cosmic place. It's being divined, channeled through whoever, and it was documented and became eventually so documented that it created a system of medicine. And
Yeah.
so I also believe that when we're tapping into the records, we're tapping into the heart. We're tapping into our own hearts, but we're tapping into the heart of like the cosmic information field. So when you are receiving information, it's going through your heart, it's going through your Shen, it's going through your own consciousness. It has to, in order for it to like become a part of you and become a part of your own co-creative process in your life. And there's so many different like business people, creatives, artists, like healers that use the Akashic records as a way to like bring in new ideas, like co-create with, like it's been used for that for many, 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 many years. And I think we would be surprised and maybe not surprised at understanding how connected the ancient civilizations were with like this infinite field of consciousness. Like they knew that you could get the answers from divining this information, whether it was like through the I Ching and Yarrow sticks, or was it through cowrie shells or, runes. It was like people felt this. I've always felt this like mystical dimension, that within that mystical dimension is that field of infinite consciousness, infinite information that we all have access to.
No, and
So,
I'm so happy you
yeah.
explained it that way, because whether it was, runes in the Celtic tradition or the I Ching in Asia, or like, just
Hmm.
indigenous Americans having other ways of connecting, or whether it was like bone reading in
Yeah.
Africa, there's just so many ways that these things were connected to. And even things
Hmm.
like plant ceremonies of like ayahuasca, they're definitely accessing these types of things as well. And that's why we also, when we think of traditional communities, you think of music and drum playing and harps and like all of these things, because the tones of musics could change the brain waves in order to enter this
Hmm.
altered state that was able to
Hmm.
access other things. So even something like hypnosis, we could just say is a form of accessing the Akashic records. And there's
Totally.
so many different words and terminologies and practices to get us here. But we're all still kind of collectively saying the same thing. And, something that
Hmm.
me and you are both very passionate about is music. And I think that
Yeah.
music is another one of those things that, because of the frequency, because of the tones, because of the beat, similar to how a drum we would do in indigenous regions, connects us
Hmm.
back to our heart. I think we can get in these hypnotic states of accessing the records and other things through even music itself.
Hmm.
So I think that for me, my first experiences directly with the records would have been through hypnosis. I think that's my first experience of truly feeling like the access point to this. Although I do think that, of course, when we were younger or other points in life, we're probably always accessing this information. We just didn't
Yeah.
realize that that's what we were doing.
Right.
I was in meditation one time, and it's funny you brought up runes because that's where I was actually about to go with this. I was in meditation a little, like probably about 6 months ago or so, just doing my regular meditations and practices, just doing some deep breath work. And all of a sudden, in my mind's eye, with my eyes closed, I saw this giant rune appear in front of me. And it looked like but like a goalpost. And I am somewhat familiar with runes because I do like to look into my ancestry. I do have some Irish Celtic history that does come from rune reading. But I wasn't familiar with this rune specifically. So the second I pulled out of meditation, I like Google what this rune was. I now found out it's called Manaz, which probably pronouncing that wrong, but anyhow, and Googled what the rune meant. And one of the interpretations of the rune was It's how the Celtic people knew they had entered the Akashic Records. And when I read that, like my mind just freaking blew because I was deep in meditation trying to access my own information. And the fact that like that was a validation for me that I could have really been experiencing that was very profound for me to know that like I don't need all the time to like go see another practitioner, to go see a reader, to go do this other work to access the records that I truly can in my own space access that. So I guess where I'm going with my question from this is prior to your actual Akashic reading training, did you feel like you had access points to the records or certain practices you did to get there? Or it wasn't until you had some like official protocol did you feel really connected to it?
Love that. I love you sharing about the runes and how what that rune represented and how that ties you back to your own lineage. You know, before I got my training, the first thing I thought about as you asked me that question was like my first experiences of like tapping into intuition was like through oracle card readings. And I used to go to a metaphysical shop where I used to get oracle readings and like just felt like so at home and felt so like accepted in that space and just was so fascinated at the idea of being able to just like read symbols and like receive information through different senses and use that to kind of like share and help people. And so I think my earliest experiences were with like in readings, like an oracle or tarot reading. And also, I also feel like meditation like can get you into that space where now that I think of it, when I enter into the Akashic Records now, I'm sort of entering into another reality. Like I'm sort of entering into a non-ordinary reality. And this is kind of like a term that you use when you're doing shamanic journeying work is like you entered into a altered state of consciousness or a non-ordinary reality in which you can tap into information and you're much more sensitive to information on a multidimensional level like that is outside of the realm of like you know your
Mm,
five senses. It's like you're expanding, you're opening yourself up to other senses. And
no, that
obvious
makes a lot of sense.
yeah, yeah. And so I think over time I've just gotten better at like diving into that place, diving into that altered state of consciousness where I can do my inner inquiry and like receive information. And there's also times where I just do like the really formal practice of like diving into my shamanic journey and work or diving into the Akashic records for myself. And I also think what you said about hypnosis is a huge part of like entering into the records because when you're entering in hypnosis, there's a part of your brain that shifts, like your left brain is like shifting and your right brain is more turning on and like there's different like frequency waves that you're like operating on, and in that state, you're also entering an altered state of consciousness. And
Mm.
through that, you're able to receive images and be in experiences within yourself. And I also want to add this is my last note on this is that I also think dreams, like as you were speaking, I was
Mm.
like, had this aha moment of like dreams are also a part of your Akashic records too. You know, you're entering into a whole different dimension of like information, but does that information still exist somewhere? You know, that field of reality and dimension still exists within the Akashic records. So
It's
yeah.
funny because it actually made me think of two things, and this is always something hard for me to conceptualize as somebody who my entire life, and as everyone does when they're younger, have like a very elaborate imagination. I think that's very common for kids and people in general. But for me, I
Hmm.
was definitely somebody like I live in a daydream like 10 hours out of my active day, even when doing
Yeah.
other things. My imagination is just like so always on fire, and it just always has been. It's kind of I think it's my coping mechanism for reality. You know, if I'm in a little bit of a fantasy world, I can get through this. And I've had these thoughts a lot recently where I think we have been misled about what our imagination is and what that space is. I think we have been kind of guided to believe that our imagination and these imageries and these things that we conjure up in our brain are simply a random combination of electrons firing and creating images and things along those lines, when in actuality, yes, sometimes they are that. But I think sometimes in reality, our imagination is, an alternate timeline, or our imagination is a parallel lifetime, or our imagination is something that exists somewhere else that we are accessing through our higher brainwaves and this, frequency that we're able to tap into. So I think that people need to start trusting their imagination a little more, or it could also be just reading a person around you. But I think that we think that that space is something that's quote unquote not real, when in actuality, the land of imagination, I feel, is just another access point to the Akashic Records. It's just another way of tapping into this field that we cannot tangibly see with our open eyes. And I
Mhm.
think for me, the what brought me to that realization was when I was in hypnosis. The first time I got QHHT done to me and I was in that space, it felt so incredibly freaking familiar. And I think the familiarity was, I was like, this is the place I'm kind of in when I am kind of tapping into my imagination. And I think for
Mhm.
me, when I was in deep hypnosis under QHHT, I think the thing that was most profound to me was when the woman was asking me questions. I
Mhm.
already knew the question she was going to ask and my answer all at the exact same time, because when you're that in that state of being, you really can go beyond time. And don't get me wrong, I'm not talking like 20 minutes into the future. I'm talking like microseconds. But when you do start to slow time down, you can perceive so much more in an instance. Do you notice for you when you're accessing the Akashic Records, does time kind of get altered like that?
Totally. And I mean, it's like meditating. Like when you're meditating and you're really deep in your meditation for like, I don't know, 30 minutes, it often feels like, wow, 5 minutes passed, but actually 30 minutes did. Like
Mm.
that time collapses. And it's similar with the Akashic Records because you're operating and you're viewing like a different dimension. And so, like, that dimension is much different from our own physical reality. And so, I think that's really, really interesting that you were able to tap into it in these altered states of consciousness. And you're right in that, I think imagination is also another way to access the Akashic Records. It's to access like the collective unconscious, right? That we all have
Mm.
access to this collective cosmic memory field that comes through. And that makes me think of like artists, musicians, like painters, like people who are like accessing the flow state. Like the flow state. Like what even is the flow state, right? It is when you have collapsed your left brain and your right brain to be fully here in the present moment now with whatever you're doing, and it's so like engrossed in that experience that like time doesn't exist. Like your creative flow is happening, you're an open channel for this collective information to come through, to be downloaded through you. And it amazes me, like when you think about different beautiful creations that have happened in the world, like if you think about what artists create or musicians create and stuff, it's like a lot of the time they're channeling this information. And it's, of course, that process is not always as smooth as we're like talking about it, like sometimes it's very similar to like birth, where like it's this push and pull process of like, pain and growth pains and like ease and flow and grace and all of the in between that life is. But I also think that when we're able to like hone in on those states of consciousness where we feel really expanded, where we feel really inspired, where we can like be in that imaginal realm and like explore, I think that's where we can truly activate the Akashic Records. I also think that, I wonder for you if this is your experience, do you access the Akashic Records when you're doing and holding space, like in your clinic or in the treatment room with your patients? Because sometimes I feel like I do. Like I'm able to just like kind of hear and receive information that I think is important for me to know or me to even ask.
Yeah, I think that it's funny because I would never utilize that terminology of, yes, I'm accessing the Akasha records, I'm holding space. But now that you
Yes.
state that in that phrasing, I would absolutely say, dude, and I would definitely say more recently it has become a lot more expansive in that. And for instance, I had a patient not too long ago, and I don't claim to be a medium or tapped into those types of realms or anything, but I was with this patient the other day, And all of a sudden, I instantly just felt profoundly, profoundly proud of them. And I'm like, I just met you. I don't really give a shit about your life, your accolades. So why am I feeling so proud of you as a human? And I just had to say to them, like, out of nowhere, my brain was just like, yeah, your grandmother's really proud of you. And the patient started tearing up. And I was just like, I have no idea why I just said that. Like, it just felt something I felt called to say. And then they told me
Mhm.
that their grandmother raised them and had passed. And it was one of those moments where I was like, I think I was just holding space so much that that was like able to come in through that. And so I
Mhm.
do totally think that now that I expand my practice, that I do think that I step into that space a lot more than I would have thought I did. And it's
Yeah.
funny because I just want to dovetail off a few. I took a few notes when you were just speaking there because, as you always do, whenever you say something, it makes you think of 10 different things. I had to reel it back in a little bit.
Yes.
One of the things I wanted to talk about quickly was I know that a lot of inventors have been, it has been shown that a lot of inventors had actually taken psychedelics to like enter, an Akash or a state that was able to access this information. And that's how
Mhm.
like some of the major inventions of our time were actually accumulated from, was from
Mhm.
pulling from that. And I
Yes.
think another interesting concept, if you've ever seen the movie Inception, or everyone has, they always perceive time that the further you went into the dream state, the longer time expanded, and the deeper you were in
Mhm.
dream, the longer you were in time. And I do feel like, again, that's a kind of a good metaphor for when you are in a trance state or a dream state. Time can be collapsed so much that a few minutes feel like a few hours, or vice versa in that regards. And I wanted to just share something interesting for you that's on this topic, that I
Mhm.
think you'll find interesting is that, and it goes to show this collective consciousness of the Akash, is that when I had my second or third QHHT session, I had a life that, for all intensive purposes, felt very much so like Atlantis,
Mhm.
like what the lore speak of Atlantis. And when I was coming into this scene of my life, the first thing I said, it was completely random. When I had no reason as to why, I was like, "Yeah, we power the entire city from the waxing and waning of the waves." I said that we had
Mhm.
like buoys out in the water, and they basically generate electricity from the tug and the pull of the waves. And I was
Mhm.
like, wow, curious thought. It's Atlantis and associated with water. So maybe my imagination and brain was just going there. And it was pretty just like a cool concept. Well, I was reading a book on my plane ride over this week. And the book was apparently a guy who had channeled his life from Atlantis. And one of the first
Mhm.
things he says in his opening scene of Atlantis was they generate electricity through the waves. And I was
Wow.
just like, what the heck? Like, let's break this down into, let's just say that was my imagination, because that's possible too.
Mhm.
Regardless, we were accessing a collective thought, memory, idea that just is so freaking random to have even brought it to light, to say that, oh, that's how Atlantis was powered. Because I know I've never heard that in my life. So it
Yeah.
definitely gave me this truth and this validity to this collective consciousness and to these access points. And
Mhm.
it's making me no longer, I'm because I'm such a logical brain person, I always need like 12 ounces of proof and validity and validation, and seeing is believing. But
Right.
I'm finally starting to really back away from that and like trust my experiences for what they are, for
Do
what
you
they are.
think that your intuition, like when you're receiving like an intuitive download or like, like an intuitive ping that tells you to like go to a certain place or go to this thing, do you feel like that's coming from the Akashic Records?
That's a great question, because I do think that, because again, if we even are looking at it from a quantum physics standpoint, time does not exist. I do
Mhm.
believe in the concept of multiverse, parallel realities, all of these things, even from a quantum perspective. And so
Mhm.
I do think that our intuition is somewhat pulling from the Akash, a probability that is in our highest interest. So, what I mean by
Mhm.
that is, in any moment, you can have an action, an idea, or a thought, or something that brings you either towards a good outcome, bad outcome, or indifferent outcome. I think our intuition is pulling on that highest outcome, and that's what it is. You're pulling on all the probabilities of this present moment and finding what the
Mhm.
highest one is, and that is intuition. And I think that does come from
Mhm.
the Akash. And there's many
Mhm.
channelers and people and spiritualists. I think Bashar says this very well too, is, this idea of excitement, this idea of passion, this idea of desire, it's
Mhm.
kind of been, it's kind of been tainted from our general perception, and that we're told that that's something you should suppress, that's something you should get rid of, that's the devil talking to you. And what in actuality, what desire and passion and excitement is, I think it's our compass through the Akash towards our highest
Mm.
probability timeline that's in our best interest.
Yes. Oof. Everything in my body is like, hell yeah. As you're speaking, I'm like feeling this connection between the womb and the heart. Like I've, what's interesting is for so long, I think in a system that deems desire and, like wants and that like cravings as like bad. I think in many ways, like desire is the energy that's the strongest energy that we can ever harness. And I think desire comes from not only our hearts, but it comes from like our sacral, like our reproductive organs. And so, like, in many ways, we've sort of lost touch with like the power of our reproductive organs. Like, I think about the womb space and how the womb space holds the container for like all of this information that is coming from the matriarchal lineage.
Mm,
Like you are a seed within your mother, and your mother was a seed within the grandmother, and like that information is stored in your body, in your tissues, in the womb space. And with that information, that is like if that's like an infinite amount of information and wisdom that we can draw from, that's just literally in the body. And I think that's another way that we can tap into the Akashic records. Like that is another way we can start to use our own bodies as like these gateways of like tapping into this infinite field of consciousness
mm,
that's available. Because your womb is an oracle. Like your body can has that capacity. If you listen and you like are able to tap that deep into yourself, it's very, very, very possible. And it's connected to your heart space, which again, I also truly believe that there's like this connection between your heart space and the Akashic field. I mean, heart math is doing so much scientific research on like just the electromagnetic field around your heart and how it expands like 6 to 12 feet around you, and how that also then connects with the next person around you, and like
mm,
how think about even what we don't know about that heart field and how that heart field impacts other heart fields and like the
yeah.
communities around us. Like there's so much more that we don't know, I think, that I think we're becoming more aware of. But when it comes to the Akashic records and this like this quantum field of information, there's so many different ways to pull it down. It could be through our imagination, it could be through the body, it could be through our own hypnosis process, it can be through meditation, our own creative process. Like there's so many ways. I think the foundation of it though is to kind of come back to however you enter in any sort of non-ordinary reality, and that could be through ritual practice, like literally sitting on your yoga mat and like calling in like the safe space around you and like holding yourself in that for like 15 minutes. That could even be a path and a portal into this infinite field of consciousness, and receiving information from there. I think there's so many different ways. And also, like one thing that I don't want to lose, I want to say here is that
Yeah.
like Einstein was a highly, highly creative being. Like he was using his imagination all the time. And he knew that the I don't know the exact quote, but it's not the material that informs the particle, it's the energy around the material that informs the particle. So like that makes me even think about Chinese medicine, because like we're treating like the body, but like we're also working on the energetic level. Like we're working with chi, we're working life force, and that's that same sort of principle of like being able to work with something that maybe you can't like see, but you can definitely feel and tap into with other senses. Also, my last point on this is like I was reading this book by Aaron Laszlo, and he was talking about the Akashic field and like the cosmic memory. And he was saying that there's a story in that book that talks about how when we were children, when we were babies, we're actually so tapped into that Akashic field, just like what you're saying. And that later on in our lives, as we become adults, we lose touch with that. We lose touch with our imagination and that inner child. And in many ways, that's sort of our first sense, like tapping
Mm.
in. And we've lost touch with that. Like, what are your thoughts? I feel like there's
Yeah, so
thoughts.
my default thought that's going to come to immediately is just a shout out to Einstein and science as
Yes.
a whole. And this is something I need to say for myself and for everyone who has that struggle. Growing up, I was just such a biology, chemistry, math brain person, but I was always so interested into occult and metaphysics and science and spirituality. And I thought that those
Mhm.
two things couldn't exist in one being. So I was always
Mm,
conflicted. And it wasn't until my later years in life, I wish someone would have told me that minds like Einstein, Edison, and several other inventors and creators of their time, they actually
mhm,
primarily studied metaphysics. The only thing they got popularized was their physics findings or their findings in chemistry and their findings in these things, but they
mhm,
primarily studied metaphysics. And I think that's so important to note that so much of our science has actually come out of metaphysical science. And I think that
mhm.
that's, again, so technically it came from the Akash, if we want to use these terminologies to fit what we're
Yeah,
speaking of here. And I think
yeah.
that the internet, to go back to that metaphor and example, is another great way of solidifying everything you just said, because I think if people have difficulty conceptualizing how our energetic fields might influence through the heart and the EMFs and the metaphysics of that, if that's hard to conceptualize, which it can be for some people, it should be very easy to conceptualize now with the internet how something, a simple thought, a single meme, a single phrase, the second you throw it into the ocean that is the internet, it spreads like freaking wildfire. And I think that that's such a great way for us to understand that if, a silly meme or a silly dance or these things can spread like wildfire through the internet, which is our collective consciousness, so can our moods, so can our beliefs, so can our politics, so can so many things. So not only do we interact through this interface that we now have that is called the internet, there is a collective unconscious version of that that is larger than that. So that goes to show how powerful our influence is on the field and how powerful the field's influence is on us. And I think
Yeah.
to kind of wrap the idea up a little bit, in this idea I talked about of passion and desire being our compass,
Mhm,
I think it's only responsible and appropriate to say that the reason why there might be problems in that avenue is because our desire and our passions are one things that are being distorted the most right now. I don't
mhm,
think it's ill to speak about it quickly and to note that, like, through things like social media and playing on our dopamine, playing on our attention spans, playing on our receptors and our neurotransmitters, we actually do not have appropriate dopamine responses anymore, appropriate reward responses anymore. Then we look at our food supply, which is full of additives. They're addictive. They're also playing on our neurotransmitters and our dopamine and all of these things. Then we look at the media outlets that are playing on our fear, which are playing on our dopamine and playing on these transmitters. So I think the reason why it's hard to follow our passions right now, hard to follow our excitements, is because those mechanisms have been hijacked by so many outside sources for so long that I don't
mhm.
think many of us are in touch with what our true compasses are. And that's why I
Right.
think practices like meditation, practices like disconnecting, practices like eating healthier can actually reconnect you to your.
Mhm. And, I have so much to add on that. And I just want to just encapsulate it into like even focusing on pleasure,
Mm,
as like a practice, because I think because we have been so disconnected from desire and like even biochemically from dopamine, we're so deficient of that.
mm,
Like it is important to start incorporating in like more things that give you pleasure, that inspire play, that inspire joy. And I think that's also the Akashic records. I think we could tap into that place when we are living more connected to our inner child. And our inner child is the part of us that is connected to that play, that joy, the things that spark us, the things that like, like we're just naturally curious about the world. That's where so much of like that imaginal world exists when we're in our inner child. Like, and I think when we can tap more into that space and also into our pleasure and remind ourselves that like pleasure is a it's a now in our modern age it's kind of like a it's activism. To like tap into
Mm,
your pleasure is like a very strong point to make, because even if you think about even like spiritual traditions and religious beliefs such as like Buddhism, you're often taught that you're not supposed to be tied to your cravings, or you're not supposed to be tied to your desires, and those things are like the root of your suffering. But actually, what is the root of your suffering? Like what it like that's different for every single person. It can't just be like this whole thing blamed on desire. Again, to kind of reel back the conversation, being able to tap into the Akashic records, like that is an ability that we have all accessibility to go into. Like we all have a way to tap into the records. We all have a way to divine that information for ourselves and for others. And it happens differently for each person.
yeah.
So
I think one last note, and I think this will be a beautiful segue into asking you to open the records, is that while you were talking there, you know how my intuition always comes in through song. There's a Billie Eilish song called "Getting Older," and one of the lines she says in there is part of her getting older is trying to relearn how to prioritize her pleasure. And I think that that line always hits so hard for me that like it is this thing that when you were younger you just naturally seek what lights you up, what brings you joy. And I think part of aging and getting older is relearning that that should be a priority. So I'm really happy you brought that up.
yes, I love that. I mean, this is a good segue to go into the records.
Agreed.
Let's let's do it. Let's do it. So I'm going to open up the records, and how this is going to go is I'm going to share a prayer, and we're going to open up the records for the earth. So, Jordan, you're going to also just ask me a few questions as I'm in the records. And I'm just going to take a few moments of silence to do that. So, Jordan, if you want to share any few last things that you want to say on the Akashic records as I open up the records, yeah, please do so.
No, sounds good. And you will just give me a note when they're open?
Yes.
No, sounds like a
So
plan.
I'm going to start opening them now.
Sounds good. So for me, in my experiences, I do feel that another access point, if you don't have somebody like Lynn, who is a great access point, whether it be meditation, interpretation, or dreams, I think that utilizing someone else as a tool in the beginning can be a great option, especially through something like hypnosis. QHHT is a form that I'm trained in, but there's several forms that are able to help you access these points. And I think that the thing that people are most surprised to find out is how easily they are able to access this on their own. We'll take a moment of silence here and wait for them.
Okay. The records are now open.
Perfect.
Yeah. Whenever I open up the records, it's always different, but I always get like this. It's like you're opening up like a closet. And it's like all that, I don't know, wind and air. Like you feel it as you're like opening, and that's what it feels like. I'm ready for a question.
What do you feel the earth in this moment is trying to teach the people on it right now?
Yeah, great question. What I'm seeing the earth. I'm actually seeing a lot of like movement and cycles, and like it looks like hurricanes, and it looks like tornadoes, and it looks like just so much weather movement on the planet. Master teachers and loved ones, ancestors of the earth, what are you here to teach us about what's happening now? The earth is going through its own evolution. It's going through its own growing pains. Similar to when a woman goes through menopause or a woman moves through another rite of passage during their reproductive cycle throughout their life, they're moving through this really important phase of transition, of pivoting, similar to how we would understand it in traditional Chinese medicine as the earth phase is in the middle. It's the spiritual pivot in which all seasons have to get in touch with before they get into the next phase. Right now is that earth spiritual pivot where lots of transformation is happening on the earth, but in humans as well. And this is really necessary in order for the earth to heal because the earth knows how to heal. We don't have to heal the earth. We don't have to try to heal the earth. The earth already knows how to heal. It's just, are we able to humble ourselves enough to listen? Can we listen deeply to the wisdom that is available to us through the earth, through her resources, through our own bodies, and also through this Akashic field that we are all able to access at different moments of our life? Can we access those things? Can we listen enough so that way we can just hold space for the transformation to happen on earth, for the movements to happen on earth? And when we're listening in that deep place and we're holding space, we will know when to take action. We will know when, because it's going to be a natural spark within us to take aligned action on the thing that feels right. Oftentimes we feel like we have to push and we feel like we have to control and we feel like we have to steer the wheel, we have to be in control of the car, but we also have to sometimes let go of that and allow something greater to hold us, allow the Akashic field to hold us, allow our ancestors and the ascended masters, teachers, and loved ones that are here to support us on the evolution, on Earth's evolution, to hold us in that. Because we also need to be held. Just like a child needs to be held by their mother, we need to be held as well on our own journeys. And so, as the Earth is going through this transformation, we also have to resource ourselves and hold ourselves and also hold each other and hold our communities, because that's how we can tap into more resiliency. That's how we can tap into a strength of that humans have that other beings might have not had, is this ability to like connect socially, culturally, like on these deeper levels. um and that's what makes us really special. Master teachers and loved ones, is there anything else you want to share about that question? If you're listening to this now, just know that you are an important piece of the puzzle. You are somebody that is here to be of support for the earth. There's many people on the earth who are stewards of the earth, stewards of the earth's energy and land and resources. But you are somebody that is an important piece of the puzzle. So just remember to take care of yourself, go slow, be gentle, have compassion for yourself first. And also, that enables you to have more compassion for others. So that's what I received. Any response to that? Any thoughts on that,
No,
Jordan?
absolutely. I'm so happy to hear one phrase you said. It's something that I've intuited and heard on my own, is that,
Mm.
we constantly think that we need to save the earth, to save the world, to save what's going on, when in actuality, she hasn't. She's been around for a while. She can figure this out. She's a great celestial being that is capable of doing
Mhm.
this on her own. She doesn't
Yes.
need saving. We just need to worry about, helping ourselves. So I think what my next questions that's going to evolve out of that is, we look at the world right now and externally see so much pollution, so much degradation, so much toxicity in every aspect of the earth. And that's being reflected
Mhm.
in our bodies. I mean, we're full of microplastics and pollutions in our food, in our water, in our air. How are we supposed to get through this pollution, even just for ourselves as humans? How do we get through this and survive that?
What I'm receiving is that many many humans have made the decision, the contract to reincarnate to learn the hard way. This is what I'm receiving. It's, and I don't want to say, I want to say that with as much compassion and as much understanding that people have all different circumstances and all different places and are born in all different situations, and just as and have so much compassion for that, because many people, you know, we don't have a choice, right? We, and what many people feel is that they don't have a choice. They were born this way. But on a soul collective, multidimensional level, many people have said, okay, we are here to come back to Earth, to experience the transformation of Earth, the essentially dying off, this the degradation, the taking of resources, the exploitation of Earth. And it's almost like it's teaching a deep lesson that the soul needs to receive in order for a deep transformation to happen on like a consciousness level. So it's almost like you, when you're, I don't know, you cook a meal on the stove and you like accidentally touch the stove and you're like, whoa, like your nervous system responds to that, and you're almost like, I will never do that again. This is a similar energy of like, this is what humans have done
Mm,
and we're going to learn, like, let's never do that again. We have to, it's
mm,
like you learn through tough love. And like, as much as that's like, this is also said, the master teachers and loved ones are saying that in the most like compassionate ways possible, because there's so much support. There's so much support, even from the earth itself, even from the earth, when we've taken so much, like human beings have taken so much from the land and have, you know, taken advantage of the earth in many different ways. The earth itself teaches us these lessons, and it's not to, it's just to help us expand our consciousness, to help us realize that like we are connected to the earth, we are connected to each other, like we are here to help ourselves, help each other, and also just live more in harmony with the earth and all of her wisdom that she's here to share with us. Master teachers and loved ones, is there anything else that you want to share on that in this question? Yeah, what they're saying is just know that you are so loved, like, and in any situation that you're in, you are so loved, so guided, like you are held, and like that support is available for you at any time. It's just as simple as invoking it into your space. Like, I call in this love and support that is here for me at any time. Like, that is there. And the more we anchor in that frequency, the more it will come, the more it will be so, the more it will be available for not only us, but other people as well.
mm.
Yes. So, yeah. Any other questions?
I think I do have one final question. Due to
Okay.
the transformation that the earth is going through, so many people are feeling physically exhausted, feeling depressive, feeling
Mm,
anxious, just feeling such harsh physical, mental, emotional things. And I know you've kind of already alluded to this answer, but if there's any clarification on, either practices, foods people can eat, things they can drink, things they can do
mm,
to, bring their body to a place to be able to even handle that. Is there any advice the
mm.
earth has itself to navigate these waters, and she's going through it as well?
The first thing I heard was community. There's a level of our consciousness that is waking up right now, that we can learn and heal just through energy. We can learn and heal just by being in a setting and a space that is that's in the spirit of love, that's in the spirit of care, that's in the spirit of like, I'm seen and heard. Most people want to just be seen and heard. Most people have back pain, different, health conditions, where they just want to be seen and heard in their experience. And of course, they want, the tools to navigate those experiences. And that's different for every single person. But the very base level of humanness is we need to be seen and heard and loved. And many people don't feel that. Many people don't feel loved. They don't feel heard. They don't feel recognized for their own value and for their own, their life. And so it
Mm.
first needs to start with finding a support system, finding a connection to a community in which we feel safe, in which we feel like we can be ourselves, in which we can feel like I can be seen by another person and be accepted for what I'm going through and for what I say. And that is so important as we go forward, especially when we're having these challenging times on the earth, when we band together as a community, when we band together as people, we become a force that is incredibly loving, unstoppable when it's done in the right spirit of energy, when we're doing it for the benefit of not only ourselves, but for others. And so we have to remember that as we go forward. And also, in community, we can then band together to stand up for the things that can change healthcare, the things that can change agriculture, the things that can change politics. When we band together as groups, as community, we can have a voice that speaks, 100 times louder. And so this is really, really, really important. And also at the same time, you start to connect with other people who are like-minded, and also it helps you be more yourself. So this is what I'm receiving in this moment about that question. Any other last thoughts, questions, things, Jordan?
No, my final question and leaving you with is there any last things that the earth might have for those
Hmm.
listening? And if not, then I think that is good.
Yeah, what I'm seeing is an image of, and maybe it's an image of like a goddess, but like it also looks like nature, like Mother Earth. Like it looks like a very humanized version, anthropomorphized version of the earth. And know that the earth has a consciousness. Like know that your consciousness, your own consciousness, your heart, your mind is also connected to hers. That we are all children of this place. And you know, can we then help ourselves and also help others begin to just honor and celebrate our mother and celebrate each other? Is there anything else you want to share on this? I'm just asking the Akashic Records. Just know that you are loved and supported. You have the support around you. It can be as easy as just calling it into your space, calling it into your treatment rooms, calling it into your home. Any moment you feel like afraid or unsafe, like you are supported, you are held. And if that takes you just holding onto your heart and coming back to your breath or feeling the seat beneath you, do those things, especially during times of like major change and challenge. Yeah, and they just say thank you.
Mm.
They just say thank you. So I'm going to close the Akashic Records. I'll take a moment to be silent. And I want to just, yeah, I'll come back and once it's closed.
I'll take a moment as well. Take your time.
Okay. All right, I am back.
How are you feeling?
Yeah, I feel good. What I received at the very end as I was closing the records was like just a big thank you. So I feel really good after that, and I just love going into the Akashic Records because it's such an amazing tool um, to tap in, to divine in that information and knowledge. And honestly, it surprises me. Like once I'm done, I'm like, what happened? Like what came out of my mouth? Because I can it's wild. Like I'm talking faster. Even when I'm in the Akashic Records, I'm talking a little bit different. I'm like energy and information just flowing differently. And so, yeah, versus like when I'm just talking as myself, I'm like, you know? And so I think being able to tap into the Akashic Records is a powerful tool that we all have. And it can be so supportive on our healing journeys and our creative journeys and our businesses as well. So if you are listening on the other end, and if you're fascinated by the Akashic Records. There's so many books, there's so many resources out there, there's so many records readers. I'm also one as well, and you can tap into Jordan as a resource as well, that we can tap into the records through our different tools. And I just want to like, yeah, I just feel a lot of gratitude after going into the records. It's such a beautiful place to go into. And also to like channel for the earth is such a powerful thing too. Well, thank you everyone who tuned in to this episode. We hope you liked it, and we will catch you on the next episode. Bye for now.